Hey guys, this past weekend I played in the Marshall Chess Club Championship where I faced a legendary New York player, International Master Jay Bonin. So if you haven't heard of Jay Bonin, it just means that you're probably not from New York because everyone who passes through the New York City chess scene has faced Jay, who's been one of the most active players in the area for probably the last, well, I would say at least 30 years that I've been playing chess. But I'm pretty sure he was already very active before I got there for at least, a decade or two. So I played many games with him when I was a child growing up. And one of the milestones in my young chess career was my first win against him when I was 11 years old. It was my first win against an international master. I remember just being very excited about that tournament also at the Marshall Chess Club. And yeah, I've played just many games with Jay throughout my life. He's still a very formidable player, and I would say that he has a resourceful chess style because he just has so much practical playing experience. He was playing chess tournaments pretty much every day for decades. And you might not be having the opening preparation of a grandmaster, but you certainly have a lot of practical experience up your sleeve. So that's what we're going to see in this game as well, because even though at some point his position was not great, but he found a really nice way to generate some counterplay. So let's get into it, guys. Why am I showing you this game? I think it has some nice strategic lessons. And of course, there are cool tactics here along the way. I was white. And the first kind of critical moment happens pretty early on in the opening, right here. So I make my first mistake of the game when I castle. Sorry, after black castles. Yeah. So how could white castling possibly be a mistake? I mean, it seems like the most obvious move on the board, right? That like 99% of chess players would make. Your opponent just castled and you got a castle. But the problem is I need to get ready for my opponent's ideas of trading pieces because this position is very much defined by the pawn structure. Right, so I have a backwards pawn. This was the product of my pushing the pawn to e4 and that trade that we made. As compensation for this weakness and for the weak square in front of it, the outpost square, I have more space and I'm the only one that has a pawn on my opponent's side of the board. And his position is definitely, you can see, a bit cramped. So if I allow him to uncramp his position, he's going to have the better pawn structure, just really nice squares for all his pieces. Therefore, my most accurate move here was this knight jump, right? So basically moving a piece for the third time in the opening. It's a little bit of breaking a rule in chess, that's for sure, because I'm not even castled and my knight is moving for the third time. But I'm putting pressure on this pawn. And in general, I would like to induce my opponent to try to reduce that pressure by blocking in his bishop on c8. So that would be a nice move for me to provoke. And I'm also using the fact that they cannot get rid of my knight because of this nice tactical idea where I basically go after their queen. It has only one square. And then it gets into the fork and I win the rook in the corner with extra material. So what will they do on knight g5? Well, let's say they play the move they did in the game. And then comes another very important move, which, I mean, I really didn't appreciate how key the square was for the queen in this position. One of the points is, I mean, besides the obvious attack, is that you're also attacking this pawn and you're also making it hard for black to play either b6 or b5. So let's say they go here, which is probably their best move. Finally, we castle. And notice how in this position, black has not succeeded in trading any minor pieces yet. That's really what we're going for here, guys. And I mean, black still has some issues with the bishop. there's pressure on the pawn. But even if it wasn't like about this pawn, which, could be a bit problematic to take right now, because then there would be like h6 and then if you move your knight, you lose this knight. But like you can go rook e1, you can go h3, basically like even very primitive h3. Like this is still a vastly better position than what I got in the game, like vastly better. So that was my first mistake in this game, guys, is that I castled in the opening. Because after he plays knight df6, I basically have no good answer to this piece trade. Like if I go knight g5, it just goes h6. And I don't have the same sacrifices in the game because this bishop is open, controlling e6. I mean, as in the line that I just showed you. And if I retreat, which I certainly thought about, but now black has a chance to develop that bishop and threaten my knight and the pawn. So I can defend the pawn, but they're just going to go here and they're going to give up the bishop, take over d5, and basically achieve a perfectly fine position. My bishop pair is not so strong when his knights have squares like that in the center. And look at all of black's pawns, guys. All on light squares, works perfectly with the bishop that he has. So it's a very decent position for black. So I felt compelled to trade the knights, even though I did that with a heavy heart. And I could certainly feel that something was going wrong. And after bishop f5, I was like, oh, I also blundered bishop e4 to d5. Like there's literally nothing I can do about this idea, despite the fact that I see it coming. So to say that I was unhappy with my position here, yeah, that would be an understatement. I mean, you're basically getting positionally outplayed as white. Not a great feeling, guys. So bishop f4, I decide to improve my bishop and kind of solidify it and the pawn as well. Now, obviously, I wasn't tempted to trade even more pieces. I mean, it's like bishop takes d5, I don't know, queen takes. Well, nothing looks appealing about that trade, guys. So I tried to keep the light squared bishop on the board. And I'm only offering this exchange in favorable circumstances, right? Because now if they take and my pawn captures towards the center and controls d5, I will be getting a much better version of that trade. So, of course, he's not going to take it. And there's lots of things he can do, but he just goes for like the obvious, bringing pieces into the center. Both of us do that. Rook e8, and I went knight d2. I had some ideas of controlling the e4 square, so his knight couldn't go there, as well as potential maneuvers of my knight to challenge the bishop. These were like hopes I had. But when he played the move knight h5, which is very strong, I realized I have a big problem because this anchor in my position is about to get traded. And even in the case of a trade, like if I take with the queen, even this knight can come to g7 and f5 or e6, and then the d4 pawn is going to be the target. So it's a very powerful move, knight h5. And all I could find was rook fe1. So I decided, let's just, bring pieces into the middle of the board and hope it works out. And I really think he should have traded here. I mean, that would have been consistent. And if I take with the queen, then just knight g7. And I think that the game is going the way black wants. And me, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's my knight doing on d2? No one can answer that question. Okay, so he surprised me when he played bishop h6. I was really pleased that he actually stepped away from that trade. And that felt like he was taking the pressure off my center. So I jumped in with my knight. Then he attacked me. And I had to think about where to move my queen. and I was deciding between these two squares. But I went into this one, which might seem surprising to you guys because I'm going into the line of fire. So obviously I had to check all the possible knight discoveries, but there was nothing. So he decides to take my knight and move the knight away. So this was the next really important stage of the game. Like basically what's happening, I'm trying to give you a sense of how this game is changing, right? Like the opening really didn't work out well for me. I felt like I was getting outplayed in the middle game. And somehow I made it to like this, the safe haven of this position, right? Where I'm feeling like things are much more stable. There's not any pressure on my backwards pawn. We haven't traded too many pieces. I still have a light squared bishop on the board to contest for the light square. Obviously, I will pretty much never be making that trade, guys. You know, better shoot yourself before taking that knight. And I had to figure out what to do here. And yeah, I don't know. That was a strong expression, wasn't it? But that's how I feel. It's how I feel about that trade, guys. So I'm just being honest. So I had to think about my opponent's ideas here. So first of all, is there a fork coming? Well, I realize there's not because the queen could just step back with a threat of checkmate. But obviously you need to be aware of such things. And the other thing I realized was there's this annoying queen trade. I really didn't want to go into the end game. I want to try to play this as a middle game and try to attack on the king side. So my problem with a move like this, which I really wanted to play, was queen f5. And then it's hard for me to avoid the queen trade because if I step back, then the fork actually happens. So I wasn't, I wasn't that into this endgame, even though his structure does get a bit messed up. But I figured, yeah, like black is just very solid here. And I also thought about this move, rook d3. And, you know, the idea is to come to f3, put a little pressure here, and also combine it with like h4. But I was really concerned about b5. And that forces me to take, knight takes. And it looks like I'm going to lose my bishop in the trade. Because even if I take the pawn, the bishop doesn't have an escape. And then I'll lose that pawn, and we're going to trade off everything. But what I missed here was that I have this amazing move, bishop takes f7. And suddenly, I get to launch my attack with the queen from the side of the board, and they cannot hold their bishop and the h7 pawn. It's kind of a beautiful refutation of black's unblocking my bishop. I didn't see that at all. That's why I rejected rook d3. It actually would make for like a very cool trap. But now, you know, black cannot stop rook f3. So rook d3 was possible, but I went for something that I was kind of happy with. It was definitely very prophylactic in nature. When you see this move g4, guys, you might think it's about attacking. It's actually about defending in a way, right? We're defending against the queen trade. And if you watch my video on advanced chess strategy, opening a second front, you might have realized there's like a little pattern. Like, I guess I like these pawn moves in front of my king. There, it was to open a second front. I mean, here, I'm just trying to open a front eventually, right? The king side, because at the moment, guys, I would say I'm not even sure what front I'm playing on. Like, I'm not playing anywhere. I'm basically sitting in the center, but with nothing to do. So I can't even say I have even one front to work with so far. So g4 is, of course, indicating that I would like to open up play on the king side, but really I'm just also stopping queen f5. So the computer actually, yeah, after some thinking, it does give this as one of its top moves. And I would say it's a really, really important part of why I was able to kind of take over this game, right? So sometimes you play a move in chess and it doesn't change the evaluation. Like black is fine. But chess is also a psychological game, right? And things, the dynamics change, right? As you're playing. And this is a move I feel like that really changed the dynamic of the game because it really signals to your opponent first of all, that you're trying to win. It's an important signaling point for sure because no one plays G4 unless they're like trying to win the game. So it's a very clear indication of that. All right, so black plays E6, solid move. They're threatening the fork now, so we need to defend. And they want to trade one of my bishops, which was not in my interest. So I move away from the trade and move away from the trade again. Now I think black should have just returned to G7, but he went E7. And I'm not exactly sure what the bishop was supposed to be doing there, but it doesn't stop me from going H4. And at this point, I'm feeling really good about my position. I mean, it's such huge progress compared to where I started out in the early middle game. Like I have a clear plan. I'm dreaming about, opening up the H file, bringing my rook to H1. It's great to be in a position where you have a clear plan and you don't see a lot of counterplay for the opponent. And that's what we got here. So J plays H6. Definitely came as a surprise to me because I was thinking, oh, okay, you're trying to like close up the game with that move, which is an unusual strategy, I would say, because it feels like black's light squares are pretty weak, right? And he's missing a light squared bishop, and you would kind of think this diagonal is not really something you want to open up, but it's actually not easy for me to get to it because he can play knight f6 in a lot of positions. He also has this idea of like transferring the bishop here. So, I mean, I was expecting G5 and I thought it was not such an easy move to break down. And it was indeed the best move. But J took on H5. And I was very surprised that somehow he wanted to open up the lines against his king. And I felt, like this must be wrong. This must be good for white. And I played king H1. As it turned out, this move would have been better. But in the game, I wanted to keep my king on the opposite color of his bishop. So just generic move. And I was waiting for black to clarify like what he plans to do with this pawn. Like, is it going here? Is it going there? I wasn't sure. So I was letting him answer that question as I improved my king position. So he plays here. And, in this stage, guys, sometimes what happens in chess is, you feel like you're better. Things have gone in the right direction. Like the difficulties seem to have faded away. And then you make a couple of lackadaisical moves and all the problems start again. And I didn't really feel the danger. I felt like everything was under control. And I decided to double up my rooks on the E file. I thought, this pawn could be a nice little target. But apparently it was more precise to go here. It's not really a move I considered because I just thought really? That bishop seems really well guarded. Like, what's the point? But basically the idea is black doesn't have a whole lot to do here. I just needed to kind of deal with his main idea. And the main idea, we're going to see it in a couple of moves, but white is better. Yeah, white's bishops are quite good at controlling the board. I could sometimes move my queen, maybe even play for f4. I could put my rook here in some positions, even consider maybe taking the knight if it sort of gets me some benefit on the e file. So white has a nice game to work with here, but I played rook e2 and was absolutely shocked by the move e5. This was not on my agenda at all because I have 4 pieces attacking that pawn. There's only 2 defenders. Like, how can that work? But, as I tried to figure out my opponent's idea, I realized that if I take, he goes queen h3. And yeah, that's why my king shouldn't have been on h1. And then he just pushes this pawn, and that kills my bishop and 2 rooks. I mean, one little pawn move killed off 3 of my pieces. Quite sad. And not to mention that the pawn is quite poisonous. So there are some ways out for white, but it's clearly not like a position you want to enter. So when I figured that out, I played rook here. And one of the points of that move is to give this bishop a chance to return to kind of get their queen out. So he played queen h3. Yeah, let me use the right pronouns there, guys. King g1 and rook g8. A bit of an inaccuracy, actually. Would have been better for him to go here. And the point is, one of the points is that if I attack the queen, he gets to stay on a much more active square than in the game. I mean, the queen is just way, way better on f5 than where it went to. Okay, he played rook g8. I got to attack the queen, and the queen went all the way back. And I played king h2. So I was kind of feeling good again about my position because I was like, oh, bishop h3 is coming. And I'm going to take those light squares. And obviously, in some moment, I will finally be able to take the pawn. So far, I don't want to do it because every time I take it, I get met with f5 and my rooks get closed up. Rook f8, good resourceful move. He's making a square available for his queen. I'm trying to block those light squares, and I blocked off the rook before it come to g5. So, I mean, again, I felt like things were more or less under control, although I could also see, my opponent had made progress with his counterplay. There's not anything really direct for black to do here. I mean, the computer just suggests things like that, which, are not so intuitive. And my opponent kind of lashed out with this move, which I'm not sure how well it was calculated, because you're basically provoking me to take, right? There's no doubt that's what I'm going to do, since you cannot take back because the bishop comes there and the diagonals rake the king. So I guess this was his plan, the check, trade my bishop and take the pawn. And this was the next key moment of the game. Okay, white's should be doing really well. Like, white's got beautiful centralization, a nice outpost for this bishop, but how to win, right? So the impediment I had was that winning this pawn and taking with the queen was running into the fork. And I have to sack my rook. And it feels like I should be getting a checkmate here, but I'm not, because the queen is covering h6. So this was definitely a letdown, as I realized I only had perpetual check here and not a checkmate. And I kind of struggled about what to do about this pawn, because if I don't take it, he's actually just going to push it. And finally, I took it with the bishop, which I could feel was not a great decision, guys. I mean, I'm basically opening up his rook, and I'm getting into a pin, and I'm opening up the other rook. But I didn't see, like, a clear refutation of it. So I did it. At least knight e3 is not like some fork that's available. However, my best move was a move that didn't even cross my mind. You could, stop the video and think for a moment here, guys, like what you would do for white. I played queen f2. So I should have played queen f2 to challenge the best piece that my opponent has. Because if they take the queen and go into the end game, they do have a really big problem eventually with f5. And obviously, I'm not going to be taking that pawn. I'm going to be just going past it, eventually bringing up my king, and you will round up that pawn. I mean, white's rooks here are so much superior to black's rooks. Black's knight is good, but, it can't really move anywhere because there's this constant threat of invasion. So and also even my king is so much more active than black's king, right? So just all the advantages belong to white. So they can't really enter the end game. But if they move their queen, they're moving it out of its great position. And at some point, I can just take the pawn. So like here, I can just take. And then I also get like a tempo on the queen, which is quite valuable, right? Now I'm up a pawn, and the black king is quite weak. So yeah, queen f2, stepping back with the queen and really challenging along with the knight, one of the two most powerful pieces that black has. I played here, and my opponent really should have just pinned me. I had seen that, but I was planning to unpin myself like this. And I'm kind of missing that there's just knight f4 in this version. I mean, I'd always been looking at that check, but here I missed it. I just realized that probably on this move I'll be sacking my queen and taking that rook. Hope that works out. Not sure. I kind of have to do it, right? Unless I have to move my king somewhere else. I don't really have anywhere else to move it, though. But anyway, there's the line here, guys, like rook takes, and then I win the knight back with a draw. Not exactly the result we wanted. So rook g5 was a good move. He played knight f4, and after king h1, I got lucky because instead of rook g5, somehow he must have forgotten that my queen could take the knight rather than my bishop. So basically, you know, I won the game due to a very basic blunder. Anyway, I thought this game was pretty interesting, guys, from a strategic point of view. And I guess maybe in looking at it, I was also trying to give you a sense in how a game changes over its course, right? Like how things start out badly, they can improve, then you get a sense that you're like taking over the initiative, even if you're not better objectively. Like what are these key turning points? And yeah, I think for me, like when I got to play this move g4, that was a really big moment, and it really started to change the trajectory of the game into giving me the advantage because, you know, we're not playing computers, and moves have a big psychological impact on the game, right? So the computer's not impressed. He's like, yeah, it's equality, but people will feel those powerful moves and it starts to produce mistakes. All right, guys, I'm sorry that I have failed again in making a shorter video. It is kind of hard to cover 46 moves of an interesting game like this, like in 10 minutes. So if you stuck with me, thanks, and I hope you learned something.